Welcome back to the IE427 Garage, everybody. Today we're going to take our second look at SLTHRR N. So I think what we're going to do today is take a look at my yearly maintenance routine for SLTHRR N, and then I'm going to also kind of walk you through my detail process, what I go about doing to get the car ready for car shows and whatnot. I keep the car covered, and I use one of these, it's like a wool lined or a cotton lined flannel type material, but it's a nylon cover. So it does a really good job at blocking the large dust particles, but there are some real fine dust particles that get through the cover. So every time I take the car cover off, you'll see I fold it onto itself to keep all the dust kind of contained in the nylon portion of it. And then we take it outside and we shake it out, and then it'll go back on the car. It is machine washable, but I found that once you start washing your car cover, in the washing machine, it just destroys it. So if you can do your best to keep the car cover somewhat clean and shake it out every time you take it off the car, it's going to last a lot longer. But let me get the car up in the air, and I'll show you exactly what I do as far as yearly maintenance on the car. All right, so one of the first things that I always do as far as yearly maintenance, and most everybody's going to do this, is I'm going to work on getting the oil changed. So I'm going to pull the plug on the oil. I'm going to take a look at it as it comes out just to make sure there's no large particles of metal coming out. And then I'm going to replace the filter. I'm going to just tell you, use a good quality filter. Whichever quality filter you use is the one you're going to use anyway. So I'm not going to tell you which one you should use. And get the oil changed. And make sure you're putting the proper capacity, in the actual pan. Because here's the thing. A lot of these pans are listed as an 8-quart oil pan. Well, that 8 quarts is generally determined by you. It's your responsibility because the dipsticks on aftermarket oil pans are universal. And so what you're going to have to do at your first oil change is you're going to have to put the prescribed amount of oil in the pan, and then you're going to have to fill up your oil filter, and then you're going to have to measure to make sure your dipstick actually agrees with the amount of oil that you've put in. And if it hasn't, you need to either shorten or lengthen the length of your oil dipstick. It's been my experience that they normally need to be shortened just a little bit. But once that's done, then you'll have a really good guide on how much oil to put in your car. If you're just going by the level that's on the dipstick, we ran into this on Jim's car, the dipstick was never trimmed, and so whoever owned the car before had overfilled the crankcase with oil, and that's actually bad for an engine. You're increasing all of the rotating mass. You're making it harder for all of that to turn with more oil in there than you need. So make sure you're putting the right capacity oil in. And then I use a weight of oil that the actual, quote unquote donor motor would have used. I use a 530 oil. Now, we live in Southern California. That's a great oil for this. It's thin enough that it doesn't make the engine overwork in order to turn the assembly, but it's thick enough that it will actually lube everything in the car and hopefully not have any issues with spun bearings and everything else. I'm not going to tell you what to run in your own car. That's what I run in SLTHRR N. So once I get all of the oil kind of squared away, what I'm going to go through is I'm going to check all of the other fluids. So I'm going to check the level of the transmission. And on a T5 transmission, basically, there is a fill plug in the side of the transmission over, where is it? Right up here. And I'm going to open that up, and I'm just going to kind of stick my finger in there and make sure it's got enough fluid. Now you can see this transmission, this T5, it actually weeps a little. You know, when it sits for 2 or 3 months, there'll be a couple of drops of transmission fluid on the ground. And And that's just the way it's always been. When we put this transmission back together, we used a, what do they call it? It's not anaerobic. It's one of these sealants like an RTV that says it's specifically for transmissions. And the T5 uses automatic transmission fluid in it. So we put it together with that, and it still leaks at where the case comes together. And that's just, every T5 that we've ever done seems to always have the same problem. And a lot of the Tremec transmissions have the same problem. Once you kind of pull the case apart for the first time, they never go back exactly the same, and they always drip a little bit. After that, we're going to go to the rear end assembly. We're going to check the level on that. So to check the level on that, let me grab my light. There is a fill plug right up in there. Pull that fill plug out, stick your pinky finger in there, check to make sure you've got enough fluid in there and you're not running low. Now what you'll see on the back here, you see a couple drips. That's actually transmission fluid. It's not from the rear end. Now, after I get all of the fluid changed, and remember, this is a good time to change or check your fuel filter too. In Slytherin, the fuel filter is right up here. So it's a canister style filter. We'll spin that off. We'll change the filter element out. We'll put it all back together, and then we'll be good to go. Once you have all that done, what you're going to want to do is go through and lube the car. So every grease point that you have throughout the car, you're going to want to make sure that you grab your grease gun, you put the grease gun on the Zerk fitting, and push some grease in there just to replace the old dirty grease that's in there, and kind of push some of that out through the boot so that you've got nice fresh grease in all of your suspension components. Now in mine, I have all Heim joints in the rear of the car. So I have a Levy 5-link in the back. And so my basic inspection for the rear is usually just to turn these and make sure that they're still tight and there's no slop in them. So as I'm turning this, you'll see that the rod end is moving on its bushing and everything's still nice and tight. I'll do that here. I'll do it at the upper link up here, and I'll do it at the other control arm over here. And if all those are good, I'll just leave well enough alone. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to check all of the caliper bolts. So on every corner of the car where we have a brake caliper, I'm going to check to make sure that all of those bolts are still torqued. I put this car together in the beginning, and it was probably in between one of my yearly maintenance routines. And what I found as I was getting off the freeway one day, I had this tremendous rattle as I was applying the brakes in the rear of the car. What I found when I brought it home and put it on the lift, one of the caliper bolts, actually two of the caliper bolts, the ones that actually hold it to the caliper mounting bracket, had loosened up. Now they had been put on with Loctite thread locker. And I put blue thread locker on there because, I inspect this once a year and I know that I want to be able to get those off if I have to service the brake calipers. So I used blue, and it had just loosened up. So took it apart, reapplied blue Loctite, put it back on, and it was fine. So go around the car, make sure every one of your caliper bolts is tight. And then go front to back or back to front. It doesn't matter which you do, and make sure that every bolt, every suspension bolt, every nut for adjusting the control arms is tight. You don't have to go nuts. You don't have to tighten these things until you fart. But you want to make sure that they're snug down really good so none of these suspension components are going to move while you're driving the car, or the things that move aren't going to come apart. So that's kind of a rundown of my yearly maintenance below the car. I just basically I usually start at the back of the car and I work my way forwards, because that way any issues that I may have when I refill the oil, if there's a leak or anything else, I'm going to spot it as I'm coming from the back to the front of the car again. So that's kind of it on the maintenance underneath the car. The maintenance in the engine compartment's just a little bit different, because some of those things I'm going to check, but I'm not going to really do anything about. Like, I may pull a plug. The car sits for, 2-3 months at a time. And so, chances are when I start it up, it's going to run rich. There is fuel enrichment percentage that the tuner studio that I use for the engine control management system uses, and so it's very rich when it first starts, and that's just to keep the thing running, to fight the the aggressiveness of the cam that's in this thing. And so it tends to foul the plugs when it's started, and until it warms up and it has a chance to clean all that extra fuel or excess fuel off the plugs. So I try not to check plugs when the car has just been started and moved and started and moved. I usually want to check the plugs after it's been driven for a while, because that way what's going to happen is I'm going to get a better reading off of the plugs. If I check them right after I started and move it, they're going to be wet. The other thing that I do is I go ahead and I check all of the spark plug wires and the spark plug boots, because in my particular car, a small block Ford, the angle at which the spark plugs come out of the cylinder heads and kind of, attach to the spark plug wires, they're really close to the headers. And the boots seem to take a beating. And so I have those flame-proof boots that go around the spark plugs. And what I'll do is I'll pull those back just to make sure that underneath the spark plug boots are still looking good. I'll make sure there are no cracks in the wires, because the last thing you want is a misfire while you're trying to drive this thing, especially if you're on a long trip. So while I'm in the engine compartment, I'm going to also check to make sure that the fluid in the radiator or the overflow is at the proper level. It's kind of hard to check the fluid level in the radiator because this has a T-filler to get the coolant into the radiator. And so unlike a radiator where you can check it, you fill it just below the cap, the cap on this is a good 3 or 4 inches above the top of the radiator. And so generally I'll just kind of keep an eye on it to make sure that the coolant overflow is doing what it needs to do. It's pushing fluid back in as the car, cools off, and it's pulling that fluid in as the car heats up. So that ought to give you a really good idea on what to do as far as your scheduled maintenance for your Factory 5 Cobra or Type 65 or whatever the platform is. The last thing I want to talk about as far as maintenance is your tires. And I think tires are often overlooked. Don't do what I do. I'm running 10-year-old tires on SLTHRR N. And that's simply because I haven't been driving it as much as I was. I'm spending far more time in the shop building cars for customers, and I just haven't had the time to go out and get new tires. The thing you're going to want to watch on your tires is the date codes. The tires are going to age out before they're going to wear out. I mean, you can look at the tread on the back of SLTHRR N, and there is plenty of tread. And I've used these tires a lot. I mean, these tires have been through autocross. These tires have been on varying street and road conditions, and the tread still looks really good, okay? Now, I am running a drag radial on the back, and I'm running a standard Nitto 555 on the front. I do not recommend that for anybody that is getting into Factory 5 or a Cobra, a light car with these tires. The problem with that is that the sidewalls on the drag radials are much softer than a standard Nitto 555. If you don't know that and you drive this on a nice mountain road, or you take it down the coast, Pacific Coast Highway, where you've got these nice, gentle, rolling curves, it might catch you by surprise, because it'll make it feel like the back end of the car is stepping out when you go around some of these corners, and that's actually sidewall flex. So if you're going to be driving your car on the street and you want the most grip, okay, let's say that you want a tire that's really grippy, and you don't live in a climate that has a whole lot of rain, you might want to go with a 100 tread wear tire that is more set up for autocross. And I would do that on all 4 tires. If you live in a climate that has rain, go for more of an all-season type tire. So the Nitto 555, or NT 555, I think is what it is a really good choice for that. And all the tire manufacturers have a similar type of tire that you can run. My next set of tires is going to be a set of Nitto NT01s. All right, so let's get SLTHRR N back down on the lift, and we'll go through some of the finer details of the car while I'm detailing the car. All right, with the oil change behind me and going through the car and nut and bolting everything, I'm now starting to go into some of the detailing. So I always like to start on the stuff that I hate doing. I hate cleaning the tires. Actually, I found a really cool way to clean them now, and I hate doing all those little detail parts, like cleaning out the radiator, like cleaning the bugs out of the radiator. So those are the things that I usually start on. Now you would think, oh, you do the tires last. Well, that's fine. You can dress the tires last if you're going to use tire dressing, but I like to clean them first. And keep in mind, I don't wash the car. There's dust on the car. There's, brake dust in the wheels. There is, a layer of dust on the car that migrated through the actual car cover. But I don't wash the car with soap and water and a bucket and all that. I just refuse to, because with the California car duster, I can get the majority of the dust off of the surface of the paint and then go after it with the detail spray and a cotton rag. So in the nose of the car, what I've already done is I've already grabbed a stiff brush. So this is a stainless steel brush, and you're not trying to get into all the cracks and crevices of the radiator fins. What you're trying to do is brush off any bugs that have lodged themselves in, so that you can get better airflow through the radiator. So I just take this, and wherever I see that a bug is caught, I just kind of gently brush it in or out, and get all of those bugs, or debris out of the fins, because again, you want airflow. I have no protector on the front of the radiator. Now, should I? Well, possibly. But, the car's been on the road for 13, 14 years now. And this radiator's been in there the whole time. And I've never had a leak, and I've never taken a substantial enough hit to the radiator that I've had to have it repaired either. So I'm willing to take my chances. And I think it actually looks better without that Nomex protecting screen or whatever that a lot of guys put in. But that's my own personal opinion. Then what I did is I came in here with the California car duster, and I cleaned all of the dust off of the nose aluminum. And then once that was done, I grabbed my detailing spray, and I got all the way up to the top, around, and then up to the other side. I just wanted to make sure that all of the area in there was nice and clean before I hit it with the detail spray. And so the nose of the car is pretty much done. And while I was here, I went ahead and I took care of the chin where the oil cooler is. I did the same thing with that. Any bugs that were in there, I scraped those loose with the brush. And then I've detailed this entire area inside here. Now, since we're out at the front of the car, I'm going to tell you, this is a functional oil cooler, but I'm not using it for the engine oil. What I'm using it for is power steering. So I have that as a power steering cooler for my power steering pump. I couldn't bring myself to have a non-functioning piece on the car. So sharing this little tidbit with you, when I first built the car, it had cruise control. I managed to save all of the cruise control components from the original Dono car, and it was operational in the car. When I put the new motor in it, I found that I had not used the cruise control once in all the years that I had the car on the road previously. And so when the new motor went in, the cruise control came out. It just didn't make sense to have all that extra stuff. I mean, there was a vacuum storage tank. There was the it's like almost like a stepper motor, a vacuum actuated stepper motor for the cruise control. All that stuff came out. And same thing with the oil cooler. I didn't want to have an oil cooler on the car that didn't do something. So since we autocrossed the car, I decided that knowing the temperatures go up when you are using the power steering a lot, and you use the power steering just tremendously during autocross, I figured it was best to have a power steering cooler versus an oil cooler, because the engine honestly doesn't get hot enough that you're going to need an oil cooler on the street. And I don't track the car enough, like open track it. And the only time it sees any track use is on autocross. And autocross is usually relatively short. But the power steering will heat up a lot in that short amount of time that you're doing a couple of laps around an autocross course. So these actual AN hoses go through the side of the nose aluminum, and then they step down from, I think this is AN 10 to AN 6, and then they go into the power steering system. So it's a functional cooler, but it is not for engine oil. It is for power steering fluid. Now I'm going to continue. I'm going to go and I'm going to work my way through the car. Now I may be jumping from the front of the car to the back of the car. At each one of those points or steps that I go through things, that I find one of those little things that people miss on this car, I'm going to go ahead and show you those. Now, one of the things that we're staring right at right now is the tri-bar headlights. I picked these up. These are glass. They're not plastic. I picked those up on eBay, I believe, and then I put my own halogen bulbs in them. I wasn't happy with the bulbs that were supplied, so I think these are, whose are these from? I think they're Hella. So these are similar to the ones we put on Michael's car, but if you notice, these have the black dot, which are legal because they don't glow. So you can have the black dot, you can have a clear dot, but you cannot have a red dot or a blue dot on these. In California anyways. I don't know what it's like in other states. And then below that I have the clear marker lenses. I thought it was a better look on the front of the car than the amber or the orange ones. But there are orange turn signal lamps inside of these. So that's the way I chose to go on the front. I just think it looks cleaner. One more thing while we're up here in the front, if you notice, I'm running overriders, but I do not have a full bumper. And the reason for that, I think it's cleaner. The bumpers look cool, don't get me wrong. They look very period correct for a street car. But I like just the look of the overriders better. And if you've ever walked by your car in the shop or in the garage and nicked your shin on one of the quick jacks, you will know that overriders are the way to go because they do far less damage to your shins than the quick jacks do. The last thing I'm going to point out is you can see how far that I've sucked these into the body. So if you look at the way Factory 5 has you set these up, these things are usually sticking out about 6 inches from the body up here. I've sucked these in to where they're about 3 inches off the face of the body back here where they come through the grommet. And so it tightens up everything on the front of the car, and I think it just makes it look cleaner. So I've done that in the front and the back. We'll take a look at the back ones when we get to the back of the car. But I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to keep working through this. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what I use to clean the tires. And then you guys can judge for yourself and decide whether you want to continue to keep using, tire dressing, or whether the way I do it is something that's just a little bit easier and better. All right, I'm going to give you a look at the front tire on the driver's side because I haven't cleaned it yet. But if you look close, and it's hard to pick up with the camera, it almost looks brown in here. You can see where the letters are nice and black, but there's just this layer of like yuck on the tire, and it comes off on your finger. Well, that's the result of using tire dressing on the car and then having dust just stick to everything. Now, you can go through and you can, wash your car with traditional soap and water. However, what I found is the hot ticket is mechanics wipes. So I've already done this tire, and I haven't put any dressing or anything else on it. All I've done is clean it. I haven't cleaned the wheel, but I've cleaned the tire. And so what you do is you're going to take one of those mechanics wipes, and you're going to you just dedicate one mechanic's wipe to each tire because it's going to get filthy dirty and you don't want to transfer all that dirt to another tire. But you're going to go around and you're just going to clean it really good with the mechanic's wipe and then just let it dry. And this is the mechanic's wipes. These are the ones that I use. I keep a tub of these or a container of these on the trailer for trips when we go cross country. And I always have one in the shop here. And so, like I said, I'll take one mechanic's wipe per wheel tire, and I'll clean the actual tire with one of those, and then just throw the wipe away and move on to the next one. All right, here's one of those subtle little details. Now, this is a Mark III. The Mark III body attaches at the front of the car with these button head screws. What I did is I went and I got black button head screws and black washers so they blend right in. And then if you look at the screen material here, I went ahead and I had that powder coated black. Now you can paint them. The obvious advantage to painting them is if they get shipped up, and these do get shipped up from time to time, is that you can just mask the area off and then apply more paint and then they're like new. I chose to powder coat them. Would I do it again? Probably not. I would just paint them, and that's what we've done on customer cars because it's just easier to touch them up later. Now, inside of that duct there is a outlet. It's a 2-inch outlet. The one on this side just goes and feeds air into the fender well. But I wanted the blackout look on both sides, so we've got one in there. On this side, there's actually a tube connected to it, and that tube comes up inside of the fender, and it feeds cold air into my heater box. So when the heater box is not actually generating heat, the valve is turned off, we can turn the fan on and we're pulling fresh air from the nose of the car into the cockpit and cooling the foot boxes with that air. Right here you can get a good look at those AN10 lines coming from the cooler, then dropping down to AN6 and running over to the power steering. All right, I'm pretty much done in the front of the car. So let's talk about the engine. One of the things that you're going to notice before I even open the hood is something that's missing. And if you have sharp eyes, you may have seen it in the last video. But I didn't see any comments about it. So I'm guessing that nobody saw the fact that this car has no hood latches. So there are no handles on the hood. And that's on purpose. I have no trunk handle either, but when we get to the back of the car, I'll show you that. I have a release mechanism. So there are two door poppers. There's one door popper here, there's one door popper over there, and then there's bumpers underneath those that hold everything tight when the latches are secured. So after Jeff Miller got all this painted, and he installed all of the weather stripping or the bulb seal around the hood, we made sure we put a couple of bumpers in there so that when the hood poppers are basically compressed, that the bumpers don't allow the hood poppers or the door poppers to overextend. So let me go ahead. I'm going to go around to the other side of the car and I'll pop that for you. All right, right underneath the dash here is a handle. You can hear it popped. It pushed the hood up just enough. And now you can see the door poppers right here. One there, one there. There are pins right here, spring-loaded pins on a handle, and those are pulled back or retracted with the handle. And then there are catches up here on the hood that engage those two pins. So that's what keeps the hood shut, and that is how I release the hood when I want to open it. Now, I told you guys that there was a special story about the paint on this car. The first thing is that if you notice, the bottom side of the hood is painted gloss black. The bottom side of the trunk deck lid is also painted gloss black. The reason for that is that someone had second thoughts on the day that Jeff was supposed to paint the car. I called him in a panic the morning that he was due to shoot paint on the car. And I said, have you shot the paint yet? And he says, no. I said, well, don't. I said, I want you to choose the color for the paint. And he goes, well, what do you want? And I said, you know how I feel about the look of this car. The look of this car is very important. It has to have a very evil, sinister look. And the way that Dave Smith described my car before it had been painted at one of the Factory 5 Huntington Beach cruise-ins, he referred to it as Darth Vader. And I thought, well, hell, that's a really good, kind of description of the car. And in keeping with that, I told Jeff to mix up the darkest metallic silver, basically, and then find a corresponding stripe that didn't stand out, but was enough of a contrast to the base color paint that out in the sunlight you could see it. And so Jeff mixed up these paints with the help of the paint store, and they named the two colors Slytherin. So I believe, if I remember correctly, Jeff uses all PPG paint. I believe you can ask for this Slytherin color combination, and then those colors are on file. But don't quote me. So Jeff had already shot the bottom side of the hood and the trunk deck lid black. And when I called him, I go, well, what are we going to do with the other paint? He goes, don't worry, it's a stock color. I use gloss black all the time. He says, if the paint store won't take it back because I haven't opened it, he says, I'll use it, so don't worry about it. So that's what we did. And then the following day, Jeff mixed up those two colors that they picked out, and he shot the entire car those colors. So that's how the color of the car, the colors for the car got their name. The car was already named by that point, but and then that's the reason that the bottom of the trunk deck lid and the hood are black. Now, because there's so much surface area on the bottom of this hood, because we're running the Super Snake hood, and it would have required so much body work to make it perfect, Jeff and I decided that we were just going to do like a truck bed liner on the bottom of the innermost portion of the hood, and I actually think it looks really good. I'm very happy with the way the hood and the bottom of the hood turned out. I mean, the way Jeff finished the body work on this is just amazing. So there you go. That's the story on the paint. All right, everybody. As I was editing this video, I saw that it was going way too long. So we're going to split this video into 2 videos, and we're going to continue it next week. Thank you all for watching. If you're enjoying the content here, please do the like, the share, the subscribe, all that good stuff. We'll see you next time. Have a great day.